Learn Hilchos Sukkah Perek Halacha Yudalad. B'mei Dvarim Amurim b'Sukkah Ktana. This is all relevant only for a small sukkah. B'Sukkah Gedolah, but by a large sukkah, schach posel be'emtza posel ba'arba tvochem. If the schach is posel in the middle, it would nullify if it's 4 tvochem wide. Posel mikan kshero. Less than that, it is kosher. Let's see. We go to the Peirush. When do we say that 3 tvochem of schach is posel and posel? Whether it's from the side or in the middle, is only by a small sukkah, which is 7 long by 7 wide. But by a sukkah gedolah, there, which is more, the din is schach posel be'emtza. If it's in the middle, posel is be'arba tvochem. It's posel be'arba tvochem, because then you always have 7 by 7. Then schach posel be'emtza. It's only posel if it's in the middle. Posel be'arba tvochem if it's 4 tvochem. Posel mikan kshero, less than that is kosher. Minatzad, if it's from the side of the wall, posel be'arba amas, then you say a doifen akuma of 4 amas. Or posel mikan kshero, less than that it's kosher because of the din of doifen akuma. Now, Halacha Yud Beis, the Rambam said that you put on it from trees branches, and you put on top of that schach, and afterwards they cut him. If the schach was more than the kosher schach was more than the non-kosher schach, it's kosher. And if it did not cover, was not the majority, you have to move everything after you cut it. Now, Gimel said if he mixes it together, and he used them both, even though that the kosher is more than the posel, still posel, except when this one is by itself and this one is by itself. Therefore, the Ravid disagrees. The Ravid says, this Ravid is written in the previous halacha, but it explains both. I see that he repeated it twice. First, he wrote the difference if the kosher and the posel are mixed or separate. V'yitziyu and Rambam derived his din imasha omer b'gemor. They said in the Gemara on Sukkah Tesman base, Sukkah Taras Ilon, a sukkah which is under a tree, which has more shade more sun than there is shade. The Gemara tells v'chisicha charbe mehem, and if he gave a lot of kosher schach, is more than the leaves my have. What's the rule? He's anyway mixing non-kosher schach with schach that's kosher because the leaves of the tree are attached to the tree, the branches. Mishani, and he answers chovton. And when he did the process of chovton, and the Rambam explains what chovton means, because the Ravid understood, not like the case of Mishnah, who understood that it meant according to the Rambam that he cut them off, but it means he separated them. The kosher stands by itself and the posel by himself. If the way the Rambam, the Ravid's presumed interpretation of the understanding of the Rambam is correct, Nekaba will accept it. We can ask regarding it. We can ask from one sukkah under the other that the bottom one is kosher, the upper one is posel. If the upper one is above 20 amas, and there we say it's kosher, it's richalu. They need to tell us it had to tell us that maybe we should make an edict in case he mixes 2 schach posel with schach kosher, that it's okay. Here is not mixed together. And the Rav says, however, I learned the Gemara with a different understanding, and as we go on, we'll comprehend it. The Ravid cites that the source of the two is if it's the majority, it's still posel, or if it's separate, is from the answer to the Gemara of Chovton. According to the Maggid Mishnah, Halacha Yud Beis, the Rambam explained that he separated them. The Halacha Mishnah explains from Sukkah that that's the correct explanation. Magen Mishnah adds over there that if you spread out the schach HaKosher exactly in the same amount as the schach posel, it's posel. And that's what it says in the Mishnah, Hidlo oleo as hagefen, if you put it down into the vine, or that the schach was the majority, it is kosher. And on regarding that, the Gemara adds v'shechovson, that he separated the schach posel from the kosher. The Rambam writes in Halacha Zayin that if you make schach with something that's posel and something that's kosher, one next to each other, and there's no place where you have 3 tvochim of non-kosher schach, if all the kosher schach was more than the posel schach, it's kosher. But if they were exactly, even though there's no 3 tvochim, it's posel because the majority is not kosher. But in Halacha Yud Beis he says, if you put on a vine of trees and their branches, and he placed them on top of them, and then he cut off the branches, if the kosher schach was more, it's kosher. Why is it enough just to cut them without moving them? Because if you cut them without moving them, they're posel because they have not been placed there as a sukkah. So what's the difference whether cutting them does make it permissible, and putting it down and they're equal, they are posel? So the Magen Mishnah explains that the Rambam learned what it says in the end of the Halacha Yud Beis from the end of the Mishnah by the vine, that or he cut them as kosher. But in the Gemara and the Rif, it's mentioned that you have to move them as well. The Rambam gives us a novel interpretation that when there's schach kosher more than the leaves of the tree, it's enough to cut off the ends. And he learned that the schach kosher has to be more, then you don't have to cut off the leaves, the branches. It's enough that you separate them. But when you cut them, certainly it's kosher. If you separate them, it's kosher. Furthermore, the entire logic of the Gemara that they required you to move it is because it's something that was created by itself and not by you doing it. When you cut it, when you take off the branches, when the majority of the schach is kosher, then it's kosher anyway because the majority is kosher. Therefore, you don't have to move it. And the Magen Mishnah says, and even the Rambam, the Ravid learned as well, like the Rambam. Therefore, the Ravid questions, often if you separated it from the Mishnah of one sukkah, it's under another sukkah. The bottom one is kosher, the upper one is posel. The Gemara establishes the situation where the upper one is totally out of the range of a sukkah because it's above 20 amas from the floor of the lower sukkah, and that's therefore the upper one is posel and the bottom one is kosher. The Ravid learns that the Gemara emphasizes that you can't use the schach above 20 as part of this covering of shade. That means that according to the original thought, they thought they could use the schach, which is posel above 20, with the schach below to cause the shade to be more than 20 amas, even though they're not mixed. And not like the simple interpretation, like the Rambam says, that you mix the schach posel with the schach kosher, they're only kosher if they're mixed. The Magen Mishnah says, therefore, this question is not worthwhile. The Mishnah explains, he means, the intent of the Gemara was to say that if you may separate them, they should be posel, because if you don't separate them, then they are posel. Maybe you'll mix them together, schach posel, schach kosher, and it'll all be posel. But la'aloche, when they're separated and there's no 3 tvochim of schach posel, then they do not become one thing to nullify the sukkah. Ravid concludes, still we have a different way of learning the Gemara. The Magen Mishnah cites that there are those explaining this question of you're mixing schach posel together with schach kosher. Every schach that's kosher is found under a piece of schach posel, even though the sun of the upper sukkah is more than the shade, and the bottom one, the shade is greater than the sun. Still, they thought the upper one is adding some shade, and the Elyon should nullify it, and the bottom one should be possible because there's no need in the shade of the lower one usage of it. Even though, let's assume, if the upper one was 50%, was 40% shade, and the lower one was 60% shade, and I would think that the lower one, 60%, part of that is 40% of that is from the upper one. So therefore, it will be less than the majority. It should be possible. The Gemara answers that he mixed them. At Chovet Romi, when you mix them together, it's okay. In the Magen Mishnah cites the Rambam 3 halachas. That if the schach posel above, the schach kosher was lamato, when you put them together, we're talking where they're literally next to each other, they become one unit, and it's forever posel. If you take the schach kosher from underneath the branches, and you still have a majority of shade from schach that is not under the leaves, it's kosher. But it has to be that the schach that's under the branches should not be 4 tvochim wide under the branches, because then it's as if it's under schach posel of 4 tvochim, which would make it posel. It shouldn't become posel because of the 4 tvochim. That's what the Torah says. Second thing the Ramban says, if you mix them, he made them as one batch of things. If the schach posel gives more shade, then has more sun than shade, and the kosher, the shade is greater. The kosher nullifies the schach that's posel. Third, if he did schach kosher separately, schach posel separately, there, if they even it's kosher, and this the Rambam says in Halacha 16. So the Halacha Mishnah questions why the Rambam didn't mention that if the shade of the tree is more than the sun, even though the schach kosher is a majority, and he separated them, it's posel like Rebbe, that the schach kosher is more than the non-kosher, and he separated them, it's kosher only if the tree is giving more sun than shade. But if the tree is giving more shade than sun, it would be posel even if the schach is kosher is more than the schach posel. And he answers that the Rambam explains the words of Rava. This is only learned by a tree, that the shade is greater than the sun. That's posel means that the shade of the tree is greater than the sun. And the schach, the kosher, the sun is more than the shade. And therefore it was not kosher, it wouldn't have shade without the tree. But if the tree has more sun than shade, and the sukkah has more shade than sun, but the shade of the kosher is more than the shade of the tree, it's kosher, and not like the Ramban and the Torah, and not like the words of the Rambam and the Torah. The Ramo says, you shouldn't make a sukkah under a tree or a house. Shulchan Aruch writes, if he does it under a tree, they say that if the tree, the shade is greater than the sun, underneath it, it's posel in any case, even if the sukkah, the shade is greater than the sun. But if the tree has more sun than shade, if the sukkah has more shade than sun without the tree, it's kosher, even if you didn't mix it together with the schach of the sukkah. This is like Rashi and Tosfos, which mentioned the Torah. But if the sukkah, it does not have more shade than the sun, only by it because of the leaves of the tree. Tzorich, he has to mix the leaves of the tree with the schach, so they won't be recognizable. And the schach has to still be more than the leaves, and that nullifies the leaves. This is Rashi. And he adds there, those who say that even the sukkah has more shade than sun without the tree, and the elon has more sun than shade. If the leaves are directly over the schach HaKosher, it's possible. Whether the tree was there first, or before you put down the leaves of the tree were there before you place the schach kosher, or whether the sukkah was previous. Since the leaves of the tree are directly overhead, like the Machon Nesher, the name of Rambam. And according to the Ran, so the Torah says B'Shem Avi Ezri v'Aravan that you shouldn't have it directly underneath, and therefore we don't make it under a tree. The Ramos cites in the Rosh Ran, if he lowered the leaves and he mixed them with the schach, that you can't tell which is kosher, which is not, which is coming from the tree and which is coming from schach kosher, it's kosher. And also, if you put the schach kosher on the schach apostle, it's called mixed, it's kosher. Shulchan continues. But if the leaves are in the ear, that's between the schach kosher, in other words, he leaves ear spaces between the schach kosher and the leaves are overhead, or the schach is so much that even if you'll take away the tree, it will be kosher. Without the tree, it's kosher, since the shade of the kosher is more than the sun. If you take away the tree, there's a kosher sukkah still there. Still, there's no difference between which came first and which came later. It is like the Halacha Rishon in the Machon Nesher and the Shem of the Rambam. Furthermore, the Shulchan says, if after you put on the schach of both the kosher and the leaves of the tree, and he cut it off, and now it became part of the schach kosher, but that's only if he moves them. He has to pick up each of the branches of the tree and put them back down, etc. If not, it's possible because it was made by itself. When he cut off the branches, it became by itself. He didn't place it as on the sukkah as schach. Rambam continues. A house that there was a hole in the middle of it, the sichech, and he put schach kosher amogim apachas, wherever the hole was. The chotzer amukeves achsadre shirsiche oleo, or a chotzer, a courtyard which is surrounded by porches, and in between the porches there's an open space because there's no roof over the center, and he put schach over there. Chen sukkah gedola, or a large sukkah, that he surrounded it with something on the sides, like he put metal on the four corners. If there is from the edge of the schach to the wall 4 amas, it's possible. If there's less than 4 amas, we see it as if the wall is bent, and the schach postel is considered the wall, and the center is kosher. This is Halacha l'Moshe Sinai, what's called doifen akuma. Because Mishnah cites the Gemara in Sukkah 17a, that if the Mishnah said the din of doifen akuma only in a house, I would think because the walls are really made for a house, but in the courtyard, the walls are not made for the courtyard; they're made for the inside. We don't say doifen akuma. You don't say that the wall went bent outwards; it only bends inwards. And if the Mishnah would tell us doifen akuma only by a house and a chutzah and a courtyard, I would say only by these 2 items you have to say doifen akuma. Therefore, the schach that goes to the kiyah and it's kosher. But sukkah gedola, that he did it with schach postel, I would see we don't say it's a wall. Therefore, the Mishnah tells us all 3 options. The Rebbe disagrees. Amar Avram, Nioli, would seem to me, Chosin mikan schach postel ve'emtza postel v'dalet. that's lacking over here, the fact that the schach postels in the middle, if it's 4 tefachim wide, it postels min atzad postel ba'arba ames. And if from the side is 4 ames, b'med b'amur b'sukkah gedolah. That's only by a big sukkah. B'sukkah ktana bein be'emtza bein min atzad postel b'shloisha. It's lacking over here. The statement that if it's from the side or in the middle, if it's a small sukkah of Zion by Zion, it is posel b'shloisha ve'ezu sukkah ktana. The Ravid questions. According to his text in the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam doesn't mention the din of schach postel in the middle of the sukkah, passes in 4 tefachim, and if it's on the side, it passes b'dalad ames, because only by less than 4 tefachim do you say ames, you say doif and akuma. That's only by a sukkah gedolah, but by our text, we have the things too are mentioned in Halacha Yudalad. The Maggid Mishnah cites that there are texts that doesn't mention these rules, and he concludes what I wrote, you'll understand the truth. Hilchos Mishnah explains that he means to answer the Ravid's question that he didn't have the text in front of him. That's why he cites different texts. Hamidul Oiz cites the Ravid's attack, and he says, say that it could be the sefer, the book that he had, was lacking because of the mistake of the writer, or of the reader who read it before him jumped and didn't mention to the Raiva at the beginning of the Halacha. Or he never wrote this at all. The Rambam obviously says this din before. We just learned it. That if it's from a small sukkah, then it passes with Dalet Tvochim. And if it's a big sukkah, it passes the Dal Ames in the middle Dalet Tvochim.